Welcome to Cross Party Lines with Chris Finlayson, Phil Goff, and myself, Sam Collins. It's a podcast designed to unpack New Zealand politics so that you don't have to. Today, we'll be delving into Davos and dissecting where global leadership is going, and we'll be reviewing whether anyone got any first mover advantage out of the start of election year at Latana and also the party retreat and State of the Nation speeches last week, not last year, although it does feel like a long time ago. And the reason it could feel like a long time ago is because Aotearoa has a very heavy toll on its heart right now after 9 people lost their lives to climate incidents in the last week. It seems as though the new normal for January is not one where we discuss the weather in positive terms, but reflect on the huge impact that climate change is having on our lives. Just a reminder, one person was swept to his death at Maharangi trying to cross a river. A grandmother and her grandson were killed in rural Papamoa. We obviously lost 6 lives in the Mount Maunganui slip, and countless other people's lives have been impacted through damage to their own property and, of course, their families. There's no dearth of evidence that shows that climate change is having an impact on the severity of these events either. Chris, I guess the question for us is, given we're trying to find common ground in this podcast, how do we find the common ground and get the two big beasts of New Zealand politics to meet in the middle and do something about real climate action?
Well, first, can I acknowledge those deaths? My heart goes out to all those families who begin the new year with tragedy. I particularly think of the families of those 2 nice kids at Pakuranga College. It's just devastating for them. Their lives were ahead of them. It's just incredibly sad. So, as the old saying goes, thoughts and prayers are really with those families at this time. I think you ask a very good question. With respect, I think I answered it a couple of weeks ago because I'm a bit of a fan of Malcolm Turnbull, the former Prime Minister of Australia, and his painting was unveiled in Parliament House a few weeks ago, and he simply stood up and said, and bear in mind, this is a guy who lost his leadership because of his principled stance on climate change issues, and antediluvians like Dutton didn't like it. Well, Dutton's record in politics speaks for itself, of course. But Malcolm stood up and said, look, we've got to take the ideology out of climate change. We've got to deal with it as a scientific issue. If there's an issue, then we have to deal with it as mankind has dealt, or humanity has dealt with these issues for many, many years. Just get on with it and address it. So long as we have the Neanderthals of New Zealand first who say that climate change is a hoax, and on the other side, you get the zealots, we're never going to get common ground. So we've got to take the ideology out of it, treat it as a scientific issue, as Malcolm said, and then, if there's an issue, deal with it. And there does appear to be an issue. A couple of years ago, I was helping the Hawke's Bay councils in their negotiations with Grant Robertson over some assistance. And I have to say the then government was very good in helping the councils, recognising the councils also had a role to play. But it was unbelievable going on a site visit to the Esk Valley, this beautiful valley that used to have vineyards and cafes and so on. Utter and complete devastation. And so then we have the ongoing problems in Tairāwhiti. Look, it would appear, to use the Malcolm Turnbull approach to things, looking at it scientifically, not in an ideological way, there's an issue. So let's get on with it. Cut out the rhetoric, cut out the extreme language on both sides, and deal with it. Make a start. It's not going to be easy, but humanity has the ability to deal with these issues if it puts its mind to it. Sorry for the rather long answer, Phil.
No, that's okay. I agree with all of that. Let me just reflect on the loss of lives. And I think we're focused particularly on the lives lost at Mount Maunganui because we've seen the pictures, we know the backgrounds, they're real people, and you can feel the tragedy that will be afflicting their families at this time. two 15-year-old kids, very much in love with each other, the stories behind it, dying in a pretty horrible way, drowning in mud, effectively. And the thing that really concerns me is that this morning I was listening to Chris Luxon, and I think he and Mark Mitchell have done quite a good job in being on the scene and showing their empathy. But Chris Luxon was acknowledging that this was part of climate change, and that climate change meant that these severe weather events were going to happen more and more commonly. As the temperature heats up and the sea temperature rises, those storms that come over us, the cyclones, will be more and more moisture laden. So things aren't going to get better; they're going to get worse. And we're particularly vulnerable here in New Zealand because we've got a young geology. Landslips kill far more people than earthquakes or volcanoes in New Zealand. And these are going to become more and more frequent. There'll be a huge human cost, and we're feeling that right now. But there'll also be an enormous infrastructure cost. And despite the fact the Prime Minister acknowledged that, and not all of them do, I see Anne Wishart's little diatribe saying it's actually because the Maori caused the trees to be cut off the mountain, and it's got nothing to do with climate change. This is sure pure fantasy. I mean, it really appalls me, actually, that you get diverted in that way. But you can't say you recognize the problem and then take steps that take you in the opposite direction from solving it. Sure, there'll have to be a lot of money spent on adaptation. We can, using the LiDAR system, map areas where they're prone to landslips. We can be more predictive in landslips, just as we can map the areas that are floodplains. And we have to do all of those things, and we'll have to remove houses from areas, and we'll have to stop using areas that previously have been, part of our very existence. But even more importantly, the world's actually got to act on it. And it isn't ideological. I can't understand, some people saying this is just woke. And then, as Chris says, there's a little bit over the top in the other direction. If everybody should understand that this is a real problem and we have to act on it. But it really doesn't help when the leader of the biggest emitter in the world, the United States, says that climate change is just a hoax. And when you look at the two speeches our own leaders gave in the last week, neither of them mentioned climate change. The issue has gone off the boil because other things have come in front of it. First of all, COVID, and now the turmoil that the world is in with Trump. And Trump has given license to people not to have to focus on this. If the United States isn't going to do it, why would we bother? They make, 100 times more of carbon emissions and methane emissions than we do. But the problem is still there, and it's going to get worse, and it's going to cost. It's going to cost hugely in human terms, but also economic and infrastructure terms. And it just dismays me that issue is on the back burner when we know that every year that passes makes solving the problem that much more difficult and the consequences of that problem so much worse. Why can't we take a reality check on that? Why does the world focus on the scrapping that we have between great powers at the moment and maneuvering, and ignore the problem that will affect the survival of the whole world? It really shows a weakness in the human condition that causes me a lot of sorrow and grief, actually.
But the humanity is capable of rising to the challenge. Let me give you an example in a completely different area. 40 years ago, AIDS was ravaging many of our communities, and we wondered what was going to be done. 40 years on, thanks to the work of various American administrations, and I particularly want to mention G.W. Bush, whose work in Africa was very positive and caused a massive reduction in HIV in that continent. AIDS is no longer the condition that it used to be. So when humanity applies itself, I'm essentially an optimist and very positive. What seems to be an intractable problem can in fact be overcome. But the first step is to stop the hyperbole, stop the kind of stuff that Wishart and others talk about, treat it as a scientific issue, and then move as Phil has said. It is disappointing that the current United States administration has the views that it has, but then I think it's fair to say the current United States administration, I would like to think, is an aberration, and we'll come to that in the fullness of time. But de-escalate the rhetoric, focus on it as a scientific issue, apply that sort of Malcolm Turnbull rationality, not the Peter Dutton stupidity, and I think we'll start to get some results.
And the reality is that this is we're at the point we've sort of passed several tipping points. We're now at the point of adaptation. No matter what happens in terms of global warming and how we manage to slow down the overall figure that we get to as a world, New Zealand will still have to find ways at a local level to adapt to our new conditions. And we're not just going to, drop all the greenhouse gas out of the the world has changed. We're not just going to be able to turn on a dime and go back to where we were in 1972. So that, I think, is a challenge to the two major parties in government. Come together, find the right people in the room to have a conversation about what long-term climate action looks like in New Zealand, and the sort of stuff that we can't argue over, but just get done no matter who's in government.
I'm going to do something very strange, and that is say something nice about Nick Smith, because Nick was the Minister for Climate Change during the Key administration, although Tim Grosser did it for a period as well. Nick worked very hard in this area and was not a zealot, but was trying to address some of these issues. And I don't think he ever really got the credit. So, there have been people on both sides of politics who are utterly committed to dealing with this issue. It is not the preserve of the left, but I think we've gone backwards in recent years.
Yeah. And Simon Upton was the other person I think of in the National Party context, absolutely committed as an environmentalist. So look, summarise, we need an evidence-based approach, not one that's distorted by rhetoric or self-interest. We need to look in the long term, not the short term. Don't wait for the crisis to be almost overwhelming you before you act, because by then it's too late. Use the technology, which is going to be a great help to us in combating climate change, because we now have alternatives to fossil fuels that we didn't have a generation ago. But we've got to prioritise it. This is not a problem that will go away. It's a problem that will get worse, and it will get worse quickly, and it will impose huge costs on us. And we need to act now. Don't put it on the back burner. Act now.
There you go. If anyone's listening, and I do know there's lots of members of the Labour Party caucus and a few members of the National Party caucus that do listen to this, so feel free to take that back to your caucus meetings this week and have a discussion. Right, moving on to the second conversation this week, which was about Davos and the World Economic Forum. Chris, you've been in Europe all this week while the Trump circus rolled into town, so to speak. Obviously a different part of the world, but you have been there. Last week we saw a bit of a taco moment. Trump always chickens out in regards to Greenland. We had Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney essentially say what we've all been thinking about the global world order for a while. And then we also, at the very last minute, and possibly under the radar a little bit for most people, the USA pulled out of the WHO, which almost, as I say, felt like an afterthought. What are your reactions to what we saw last week, which was, to be honest, so crazy my head was spinning?
Well, I'm actually not that far away. I'm in Salzburg, just down the road from Davos, and I try and get to Salzburg as often as I can for a bit of good old Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I can assure you I don't go there for the sound of music. Salzburgers hate the sound of music. And apparently Maria von Trapp was an old battle axe, and I always maintained that Captain von Trapp probably should have married the Countess, who was better dressed anyway.
You old romantic.
Mozart's really good for your brain. Apparently rats get out of mazes quicker listening to Mozart, and cows produce more milk. So maybe they should play more Mozart at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I think it was a very interesting speech by Carney. the response was vulgar and intemperate, but Trump calling him Governor Carney and so on is just so naff and childish above all. But coming out and saying, well, really, we're not going to be able to live in a world dominated by superpowers. The middle ranking powers need to start thinking about some of this stuff. Initially, the response was very positive. I see that the Federal Treasurer in Australia, Jim Chalmers, said, oh, that speech has excited quite a lot of comment inside the Australian government. Probably the reality is everyone agrees with it. Trump is a vulgarian. He is a bully. And his view of the world is unacceptable to the vast majority. And his words play into the hands of people like Putin, and who obviously would still like to get his hands on the Baltic states and so on. But then a few days later, people are starting to push back a little bit on Carney's speech because they're frightened at the consequences. And you can see that Trump was saying to Carney, well, Governor, if you do a deal with the Chinese, I'm going to slap 100% tariffs on you. When you're dealing with an impulsive narcissist, such as we have in the White House at the moment, then I guess the prevailing view is that you've got to tread fairly warily. So the answer to your question is and Phil would have a better insight than I have, everyone would agree with what Carney had to say. He is 100% correct. And one would hope that a country like Canada would be able to take the lead on it. I guess the good point is that, like so much of what Trump says, it went too far. And when he started insulting the Allied troops in Afghanistan and their contribution, I see, Phil, you made a particularly good intervention on that just overnight. I think everyone knows this guy's gone too far, and even he stepped back, some say as a result of comments made by King Charles, about what was going on.
Yeah, well, I'm going to adopt some of Chris's optimism from the last discussion and say that I think this may be a turning point for the Trump administration. And there are three things that have happened that were important. One, Carney wasn't the first to think like this, but he was the first leader to come out and say it explicitly and articulately. And he wrote his own speech, and he got a rare standing ovation at Davos when he'd finished speaking. He said what most of us were thinking. And I think on this podcast, I've argued before some of the things that he has said, that there is an alternative to simply submitting to Trump and stroking his narcissism and going along, and it's standing up against him. The second thing that happened was that the Europeans did stand up against him, and people like Macron and Donald Tusk in Poland, starting to challenge what Trump was saying and the approach that he was taking. But because they stood behind Denmark and they didn't back down, Trump was pushed into a position where he was the one that actually had to step back from his remarks. And, there were a number of reasons for that. The impact that it had on the stock market obviously always influences Trump more than his fear of what the Europeans were probably saying. But even within the United States, probably 3/4 of the American people don't accept what Trump is doing over Greenland. They don't accept his logic. They can't understand why he is deliberately confronting the people that have been most supportive of the United States. And the thing that really tipped it over were those egregious comments that he made about, the Europeans, could we really rely on them? Well, yeah, they'd say they came to Afghanistan, but we know that they were stepping back from the front line. A third of the people that died, the service personnel that died at the war in Afghanistan, were other NATO members than the United States. And he so angered the British public that Starmer for the first time came out and said that Trump's remarks were insulting and that he needed to apologise for them. Now, good on Starmer for doing that. I understand why he did it. If he hadn't have done it, I think he would have lost all credibility. But guess the one leadership in the world and the one foreign minister that hasn't criticised Trump over this, and that's the New Zealand government and Winston Peters. He said, "Oh, no, I left it up to the Minister of Defence, Judith Collins. She made a comment." I read a comment carefully. There was no criticism of Trump. No criticism from Luxon, no criticism from Peters. This was the sign of leaders that didn't have the courage of their convictions, that allowed the families of 10 New Zealand servicemen that died, servicemen and women, I should say, that died in Afghanistan to feel that the deaths of their loved ones had been cheapened by Trump's comments. I've had letters from emails these days from veterans saying how angry they felt about that. I put something up on Facebook. You know, normally I might get a couple of hundred likes, sometimes 1,000. It's up to over 14,000. This shows and a lot of people saying, I don't normally agree with you, Phil Goff, but on this, it really has struck that nerve. And, you know, and so it should. You know, I attended the funerals of some of our service people at Linton Camp and at Burnham Camp. I attended my own nephew's funeral in the United States. I saw the grief and the anguish of the families who had lost their loved ones. And for a guy that had dodged the draft for 5 times to come along and say they really didn't do anything, they stood back from the front line, is gross and appalling. It's despicable.
Should we just call it what it is? Because what it is it's politicking, right? Winston Peters is holding the government to ransom because he knows that there are several people that would form part of his constituency in 2023 that believe that Trump is a good thing for the world, right? So that and the government is held ransom by the sheer need of Winston Peters to stay relevant. And I actually put something up on my Facebook post, and I shared it to the Cross Party Lines feed a couple of days ago as well, that actually, especially when you talk about what Winston said about the WHO and the fact that they were globalist, bureaucratic elites that were doing no good with taxpayer money, that is specifically kowtowing to the kooks and the cranks that and conspiracy theorists that he's hoping to get to vote for him this year. So what does Luxon do about that? I mean, does Luxon realize this, or is he too busy dealing with climate disaster to focus on what Winston's saying and not saying about Trump's actions?
Well, before I answer that, I should say that New Zealanders need to take a good hard look at New Zealand first this year. Some creature from Reform, the Reform Party in the United Kingdom, has been visiting New Zealand first in the last couple of weeks. So what we see are quite strong links between the Reform Party, which is an aggressive populist party in the United Kingdom, which has grown out of the United Kingdom Independence Party, led by a most unpleasant fellow in Nigel Farage, who Peters counts as a friend. And then we've got the Pauline Hanson type person in Australia. She wore a burqa in the Senate twice and got biffed out for bad behaviour. Totally unintelligent former fish and chip shop owner from Queensland. And then you've got the forces of MAGA in the United States that Peters refuses to criticise. And as you say, whereas the Australian government was perfectly content for the governor of the Reserve Bank to sign the letter supporting the position of Jerome Powell in the United States, and other governments have not reacted. Peters reacted to our governor signing that letter. We've got these stupid statements that he made about the World Health Organization. You've got the failure to criticise the defamation of brave New Zealand soldiers. What we have is a pattern here, and it's a link between New Zealand First and these ghastly populist parties throughout the world who are distorting and perverting politics at the moment. And before people vote for New Zealand First, just bear in mind what happened with Reform, and before it, the UK Independence Party. They advocated for Brexit. They achieved their aim. And as Phil would know as a former High Commissioner to London, the devastating effects of Brexit are beginning to get clearer and clearer in the UK. It was a 50-year calamitous decision made by old, nasty people who don't like foreigners. The wogs begin at Calais, and the effect on the UK economy is there to be seen. You support a populist party, you vote for this kind of nonsense, and it will be ashes in your mouth. As I tried to say earlier when dealing with climate change, I'm essentially an optimist and an idealist without illusion. But these guys are illusionists without ideals. They are revolting specimens throughout the world. They need to be called out. They are wrecking the world economy. They are causing so much mayhem. They have no place in a civilized political system.
Yeah, let's look at why Peters is doing that. He's a small section of his voting base, well, a small section of the New Zealand population, possibly a larger section of his voting base, are the anti-vax conspiracy theorists. So he's playing to that audience, just as he did when he visited them at the protest in Parliament grounds, and found it quite acceptable that the protesters there could have images of the Prime Minister Ardern hanging by a noose, and he wasn't affronted by that, but he was affronted when there was a protest outside his own house. The second thing is the timing. It's the timing that coincided with Trump actually withdrawing from the World Health Organization. And, Peters is an admirer of Trump. He's a populist like Trump. But look, this guy has been foreign minister for 8 years. If there is this problem with the World Health Organization, what has he been doing for 8 years when he's been in a critical position as the New Zealand Foreign Minister? The WHO is a subset of the United Nations to make a change. He's done nothing. He's suddenly discovered the issue. He said that we're spending millions and millions on them. He didn't have a clue when he was asked on radio this morning. Actually, I think it's 2.3 million is the assessed contribution we make a year, and there's a voluntary contribution on top of that. A relatively small amount to an organization which has had remarkable achievements. It's eradicated smallpox. It's nearly eradicated polio. It's created a vaccine to deal with the Ebola virus. It is a critical organization because pandemics don't stop at national boundaries. You have to have an organization that you can deal across the world. But there's no recognition by Trump, Freudian slip, by Peters of that. And, the truth of the matter is that the organization, while it could do with improvement in how it's managed, all organizations can, it's a critical organization for the world to deal with those problems. And it's a critical organization to help the developing world that loses millions and millions of people to diseases that are preventable diseases. Now, Trump having cut foreign aid by 90%, the wealthiest country in the world cutting their aid by 90% so that people will die of preventable diseases, die of preventable starvation, is now withdrawing his support, and they paid about 23% of the WHO budget, now withdrawing its support from the organization that is designed mostly to help those countries that need that vital assistance as a matter of life and death. But he doesn't care. And again, Peters hasn't acknowledged any of those points about the WHO. He simply said, where Trump goes, I go. Where my supporters want me to talk the nonsense, I guarantee Peter's had his anti COVID-19 injection, unlike the people that he's trying to appeal to. He is doing that out of pure politics with no principle, no value at all. And it's quite frankly, and again, it's a disgrace.
Can we play a little bit of a hypothetical? The hypothetical is, what if it was anyone but Winston Peters that was the foreign minister right now? What would you guys like to be seeing, given everything that we've just talked about that came out of Davos? Whether it's Penny here today on the Labour side, who is currently foreign spokesperson, or whoever, I wouldn't be able to tell you who it was in National. But regardless, what would you be wanting to see from them right now, Chris?
In a measured way, simply to call out the lies. I mean, Phil's right. The various subunits of the United Nations do very good work. And I was a bit surprised, Phil. I didn't know what the World Health Organization had done that was so wrong. It's done some pretty impressive work over the last few years. And then you've got organizations like the World Intellectual Property Organization, the International Maritime Organization. There are too many to list this evening or this morning. But I mean, they all do good work, and they all work across boundaries because we're an interconnected world.
Yeah. And to your question, Sam, as foreign minister, I wouldn't be speaking in precisely the words and terms that I'm using here. I'm relishing my freedom here to say what I actually believe. But equally, if I were foreign minister, I would be making the same points, but using different language. And it is important to call out the lies. You can't simply accept as said that the aggressor in the Ukraine-Russia war was Ukraine, the country that was invaded by the other country and is defending its territory. You can't accept that Zelensky is the dictator when Putin is the person that slaughters his opponents, poisons them. So you have to say those things are wrong. You don't need to mention Trump's name. Carney didn't mention Trump's name once, but he made the points, and he made them clearly, and he made them well. And he was calling for what New Zealand actually has been doing in the past for a long, long time. He said the way to deal with superpowers that try to bully their way into getting what they want is for the middle powers, and he could have added the smaller countries, to stand together united against them. And he said to create shifting coalitions. And we did that. On disarmament, we had the New Agenda Coalition, where we had a diverse range of countries, including South Africa and some of the Scandinavian countries and Austria and so on. Carney said we don't all have the same same interests and values on everything, but we share values and interests with many other countries. And I think when we were talking about trade a few episodes back, I said, well, look, it would be fantastic to bring together the European Union and the Comprehensive Partnership for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we can do that. And countries will do that when they feel that they're under threat from big countries using economic coercion. So the obvious response to Trump is for other countries to come together with trade agreements to trade freely and according to the establishment of accepted trade rules on all parties, because it's no good trying unilaterally to negotiate with a man that created the North American Trade Agreement when he was, or the current version of it when he was last president, and now says that he's totally against it and it doesn't work for America's interests. So the way to deal with the United States in that is to trade around it. It might be the most important country in the world, but it will suffer more by being locked out of the trading agreements that allow other countries to work off each other's strengths and to lower prices than to submit to the blackmail that and the economic extortion that he's applying to the rest of the world. So I think there's a blueprint there, and the answer is not ever to appease the playground bully, because it only encourages the bully. The answer is for people to group together to stand against the bully, and then the bully has to alter his behaviour rather than the other countries having to submit to it.
But I think there are some good signs, whether it's the, I was going to say the murder of citizens by ICE agents in Minneapolis, but let's avoid hyperbole and say the killing by federal agents of innocent people in Minneapolis. But what we're seeing sort of fissures in the Republican Party, and people are starting to say, oh, hold on, what is going on? And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the next little period. The overreach is now starting to affect good, decent Americans in places like Minnesota. That's point number one. The second point, to just endorse what Phil said, is when you're responding to Trump, one of the best, if not the best example I've seen in recent times was the soon-to-retire United States Republican senator from North Carolina, Tom Tillis, who would be, in New Zealand terms, a very right-wing senator. But he called out Trump on Greenland in a very careful, objective way, and no insults against the president or anything like that, because obviously he's the leader of his party, going through the facts and absolutely skewered every position that Trump made. So when you've got people like Tom Tillis, the senator from Alaska, the senator from Maine and others, they're starting to say, hold on, this is not good enough. This is not the America that we believe in. Then hopefully the Republican Party, which has been enthralled to this fellow for a decade now, is emerging from this nightmare, and will start to stand up for the kinds of principles that one expects the Republican Party to stand up for, those of Eisenhower and Teddy Roosevelt and Lincoln. So I'd like to think that overreach in the domestic scene is going to help finish them off.
I'll go a little bit further than Chris and being prepared to use the word murder. Murder is when you have the intent to kill somebody illegally. And I've seen the video of Renee Good, and the video does not lie. It shows her speaking, not in an aggressive but a friendly and pleasant manner to the guy that killed her, turning the car away from him firing 3 bullets into her head, and then saying "fucking bitch," just to add insult to injury. And then the latest one with the ICU nurse, Pretty, where, okay, he was carrying an arm. He never presented the arm. It's legal to carry an arm in the United States, and Trump would be the first one to demand that right for people. Again, not being aggressive, trying to protect somebody else that was under siege from the ICE worker, never drawing the arm, being forced to the ground with pepper spray, and then they shot him 10 times. 10 times. Now, ironically, or interestingly, I should say, in both of these cases, they were 37-year-old mainstream Americans, European Americans, people that conservative Americans might be able to identify with. But the really sickening thing to me, Chris, is the lies told by the Secretary for Homeland Security, where she said, one was a domestic terrorist, and the other, I'm just trying to remember what the phrase was that they used, but he was behaving aggressively. He wasn't behaving aggressively. Yet these people will lie to defend the illegal killing of a human being. This, I don't want to go into hyperbole, but, this is the sort of thing you might expect from the brown shirts in Nazi Germany. You don't expect in the United States, or shouldn't expect from them. So internationally, Trump is doing things to isolate himself. domestically, he's doing things that any thinking American would want to believe knows to be wrong, and having an appalling impact on American society. So, the midterm congressional elections, from my point of view, just can't come soon enough. We've got to wait another 10 months, unfortunately.
So the message to New Zealand voters this year is, sure, the big beasts of politics, National and Labour, have scraps over things, but basically both parties have good people in them. Do you really want to support a right-wing populist party whose leader has been the leader for 30 years? Every election starts coming out with the anti-immigration nonsense, and whose party is linked with the Reform Party in the United Kingdom, and look at the damage those people have caused, is overly sympathetic to the current United States administration. Do you want those sorts of politics in New Zealand? I don't think so. We're a much better country than that.
And speaking of the big beasts, actually, let's move on to the final topic. I think we put a real pin in that one, and I don't think anyone that listens to this podcast could ever assume anything other than what our actual opinions are about New Zealand first. But so the big beasts themselves, they had a big week last week. Both.
Are you sure about that? You think we've communicated it clearly enough?
Well, no, I think we'll keep going. We'll definitely keep going, but so yeah, the big beasts had a big week last week. They both had their party caucus retreats. Chris Hipkins had a speech on Thursday. Chris Luxon had a State of the Nation on Monday. We're running out of time in this week's episode, but I guess just very briefly, do you think either of the Chris's managed to get sort of a pole position running start on the year over the other, or is it still pretty much neck and neck in your eyes, Phil?
Yeah, I listened to the speeches given by both of them, and they both reflected their position. One, the State of the Nation, was the leader of a country. It's saying this is the progress we've made, but he came out with his slogan, which is "National is fixing the basics and building the future." But the media thought that the speech was pretty tame. It did pretty much what he's been doing all along. There was no change to it. There was nothing new. The thing that I followed most closely was actually the international stuff, where he kind of made that. I recognised a whole lot of the phrases written by Foreign Affairs because I've seen them before, long before this speech. But the delivery was so pedestrian, and the points made without any emotion or sense of commitment or what the man actually believes and is passionate about, that they were totally lacking in impact. The Chris Hipkins speech was an opposition speech, which is, touching on the policies, the future fund for New Zealand, the free doctor visits for free visits, and the capital gains tax, but largely focused on the fact, this is a government that is not giving you hope, that doesn't have a plan for the future, and that a better future is possible, and we can deliver. I saw a journalist that made an interesting comment that Luxon gave a dreary speech in a flashy venue, the International Convention Centre, and it is flashy. And Hipkins gave a dynamic speech in an appalling venue, which was the Quality Inn in Lincoln Green, which really is low grade. I think probably that reflected better in that sense on Hipkins.
Chris, did you have any reflections?
I never pay too much attention to State of the Union addresses because they're set piece and pretty boring. I think Mulloon started them when he used to go to Hatfield's Beach, I think it was. Must have been quite a sight to see him swimming. And then he'd go off to Orewa to speak at the Rotary Club, and that's how it all started. But I pay no attention to it. But I do want to, as the new year dawns, just call out two people who have announced their retirement from politics. The first was Adrian Ruafe. He was a hell of a good speaker, Mallard couldn't resist entering into the debate himself, but I think Adrian will go down as one of the great speakers, and I'm personally very sorry he's going because he's a really nice guy. He was a good MP following from Tariana in Tītai Hararu, deeply connected with Ratana. I think his grandfather could have been Ratana, deeply connected with Ngāti Apa. So he leaves politics with his head held high, having served his country very well in the role of Speaker. The second person is Maureen Pugh, who's had a particularly rough year with the death of her husband and her daughter. Life hasn't been easy, servicing a very large electorate in West Coast Tasman. She and Damien have had a few scraps down there over the years, and I think she was a very good local MP and a thoroughly nice person. You may recall that Bridges had those comments about her in that Jamie Lee Ross, his great supporter, Jamie Lee Ross, who now runs a knock shop in Auckland, and commenting on how she was effing useless. I think that was the conversation where apparently they decided that I was past my use-by date, and I've actually never spoken to Bridges since that came out, so I'm not the most forgiving soul on earth. But Maureen she wasn't effing useless. She did a very good job. And so she moves on. And I think both of them need to be acknowledged for their contribution to New Zealand. So not answering your question, of course, but no, I don't think the state of the nation addresses amount to very much. I would say this, however, maybe it's a reflection on me. I'm sick of negativism and want a bit of optimism. I do strongly believe throughout the world, to quote JFK, it's time for the torch to pass to a new generation of younger politicians. I mean, the Senate in the United States is a gerontocracy. It's time for some of these old coots to move on and to let the young people address some of these issues. And whether it be of the right or the left, I think they're capable of coming up with some pretty good solutions. So time for the old ones to move on. It's very interesting, by the way, that a few weeks ago I was talking about mandatory cognitive and health tests by independent medical people. And the Democratic senator from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, introduced a bill to the Senate. He must have been following this podcast. He introduced a bill to the Senate about mandatory retirement ages for cabinet secretaries, presidents, and United States justices. So I think our influence is spreading far and wide. And if the senator from Massachusetts is listening to us, that's a good thing.
We're going to hold it close. And actually, and not to conflate the two in terms of people that need to move on because of age, but I actually, going back a subject with Maureen Pugh, first of all, I hadn't heard about her husband and her daughter, which is incredibly sad. So sorry about that. Very sad to hear. But I just noticed before we started recording this evening, Monday the 26th, that Damien O'Connor has actually said that he's not going to contest that electorate. So he may still stand on the list, but the people of West Coast Tasman will have a brand new suite of people to choose from when they go to the polls at the end of this year.
I think that's a good call, actually. I hope Damien stands again. He's a St. Bede's old boy. I'm a St. Pat's old boy. We who are educated by Marists, we're all basically the same sort of people, regardless of what party. And he did a very good job as agriculture minister and trade minister. So I think that's a good call on his part, and it'd be good for the coast to have a fresh competition.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings us to the end of the podcast this evening. Thank you very much, guys. I know a special big thank you to you, Chris, who is on holiday in Salzburg in Austria and has still made the podcast record at essentially the same time we usually record it anyway. For all those that have followed the podcast since last week, thank you very much. I think everyone will remember that I said we had 3,011 people following us last week. As I look, and this is still 2 days behind, we've had 281 people join the Cross Party Lines team. So keep joining, keep hitting follow, and keep sharing it with your friends, because we want to make sure we spread good political discourse around New Zealand and hopefully to the United States as well. I'll see you guys later.
Yep, ka kite. Go well. Enjoy Salzburg.
I'll do my best.